And I'm Therese Martin. I'm a member of the Fairfax League, and I'm coordinator for voter advocacy for the League of Women Voters of Virginia. You've all received programs with bios of the panel members, and so I will just add several comments. Both Kim and Brian here were members of their county's commission formed to review what caused and propose solution to the long lines at the polls in the November 2012 election. Brian here also is providing input as Secretary of the Fairfax County Electoral Board. Judy will bring us the Registrar viewpoint and was highly recommended by Betsy Mayer, former Virginia League Voter Service Chair and co-chair with me of the State League's Election Laws Study. Leslie was highly recommended by several faculty members from George Mason University and is very well known in the elections profession. For those of you who have lived in Virginia all their lives, you may have not be familiar with the state office of Secretary of State, because this role, insofar as elections are concerned in Virginia, is under the State Board of Elections, what is soon to be the Department of Elections in Virginia. Thought I'd throw that out. This program is being supported in part by a grant from the League of Women Voters Education Fund as part of its public advocacy for voter protection project. We're concerned today with ways to protect the ability of all citizens to vote without endangering their health or climbing mountains or voting under armed guards as if in Afghanistan, whether they're longtime or new voters or those still engaged in gaining access to the polls and participation in our democracy. And now, Leslie, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Therese. I'm thrilled to be here today. As Therese explained, the Secretary of State in Virginia does not have jurisdiction over elections, and so my familiarity with Virginia elections extends only to my serving as a poll worker in Arlington County for 14 years. So, and I do have a fair amount of contact with the Virginia State Board, but most of my familiarity comes from dealing with the secretaries who do have jurisdiction over elections. Therese mentioned that we were going to do a comparison of the Presidential Commission's report on election administration that was released earlier this year with some of the localities in Virginia, in Northern Virginia, and how their elections were conducted. I would say that you are overall very well served in Virginia as far as election administration is concerned, especially by your very dedicated local election officials. Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Oh, my God, I'm going to have to start all over again. Oh, jeez. Is this better? Yeah, I'm...
That doesn't have a microphone.
I'm too short behind this table, aren't I? I was concerned about... Maybe I'll sit on my foot. Is that better? Okay. As I was saying, you're very well served in Virginia by your state and local election officials. Pew Center on the States recently released an election performance index, and Virginia finished in the top 20. And in my opinion, probably should be ranked higher because they have implemented online voter registration, which wasn't counted because it wasn't implemented by the 2012 election. So your election performance index will continue to improve over the next couple of years. I think that probably the League plays a very important role in how well elections are run in Virginia. I think you're very passionate advocates on behalf of the voters and on behalf of the process. And so, as we find in many of the states, the League is a key partner in the constant improvement of election administration. Couple of the things that they asked us to look at within this report were the comparisons of polling place management within the report and the polling place management within the Virginia localities, and poll worker recruitment and training, which I think are two very important things. And then I think Judy is also going to cover voter registration list maintenance, which obviously has a big impact on how well the polling places run on election day based on how many voter registration problems there are. So I'm going to turn it over to Judy, and then I'll be happy to moderate some questions, and we can cover some of the recommendations, but I think it's more important to hear from the localities first, and then we can compare the recommendations from the report.
All right. I chose the topic of list maintenance because I was actually just selected by the State Board of Elections to serve on a committee regarding list maintenance. I think the implementation of the online voter registration is a great step forward for us. It helps us to reduce the time spent processing applications, reduces errors in doing data entry, helps us to not have to decipher sloppy handwriting. And then it also allows individuals the opportunity to register to vote or update their voter registration 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So they have no reason not to be able to get that done. We're hoping that by having more accurate lists, we'll be able to reduce lines at the polling places and also reduce the number of provisional ballots that we issue. It means that voters do not have to hand their personal information to individuals sitting on the street asking for their applications, and therefore they can do it themselves. There are a lot of people now using the internet, and we have found that a lot of the younger people are registering using the online voter registration. In Virginia, online voter registration was implemented in July of 2013. As of April 14th of this year, the State Board indicated that we'd had 63,674 applications received statewide using that system. We have also found, though, that there are a number of people that are submitting the applications using this system that do not have a DMV customer number. Therefore, their applications are coming through, but they don't have a signature. So there's a process that they have to follow all those steps, or they have to print the form and mail it in. That's still a significantly large number of people, so there are steps in place by the state for us to reach out to those individuals. We worked with the State Board of Elections and got them to create an Excel file that we can send the correspondence to them. There is a correspondence letter that is generated through the system, but it does not really work well for us. So we've implemented our own letter, and we also send out the election schedule for the year with that letter telling them they need to fill out the application, sign it, and mail it in before they become registered to vote. I think one of the things that we found through that process, though, is that people do not understand the process. I think there's a little bit of confusion as to what their DMV customer number is, so they don't really understand. And some of the people are using other different handheld devices to do this, and they don't have the capability of printing it at the time that they fill it out, so that makes a difference. So educating the public more on that process would be helpful. The commission study also indicated that we need to be integrating the data acquired through the Department of Motor Vehicles into the statewide voter registration system. That would be something I think that the state probably will be working on. I'm sad to say, but we are no longer going to be in the Department of Motor Vehicles in Leesburg beginning May the 1st. We have found a decrease in the number of applications that we're receiving since the implementation of online voter registration, and that has been going down for some time. People have gotten familiar with it, and now I believe are using the online system. We figured that maybe some of the reason here, and we also saw an uptick in the number of provisional ballots and the people indicating they registered at the Leesburg DMV. We believe by us being there, the people are handed an application, and they walk out the door with it because they're given the application back and they're supposed to come to our window. So they're actually leaving the building with the application. So we're hoping by us not being there, the process will work. We have talked with the DMV, and the DMV is in the process of looking for technology to be able to allow people to register online at the customer window when they're doing their DMV business. Again, I think that once that has been integrated into the system, hopefully the submission of the information to the state board or to us individually directly from the DMV so that we don't have to re-enter it is going to be a plus. And then the next thing was expanding on the interstate exchanges of voter registration information. I fully believe that list maintenance is very important, and the State Board of Elections is very active in the different things that are out there. We have the federal legislation from the National Voter Registration Act and the Help America Vote Act that have put in some things that have helped us to proceed forward. The Help America Vote Act is one that meant that all states had to have a centralized database. This is very helpful in doing the list maintenance and allows other places to participate better. There was a study done by the Pew Center in 2012 that indicated that there was a lack of communication and data sharing among the states and causing voter registration lists to be outdated and have errors, and basically was showing that was showing as the second and third biggest problems at the polling places, the voter registration and the inactive voters. Our Virginia General Assembly has passed lots of bills that have helped the state to be able to share data with other states and put into place different things that mandate that we do this list maintenance process. Virginia became involved in the Electronic Registration Information Center, which is called ERIC, in 2010, and then joined the Interstate Voter Registration Crosscheck Program in December of 2012. State Board, believe it or not, is the founding member of ERIC and is one of the founding members of ERIC and the first state in the Eastern Seaboard to join the crosscheck. ERIC was officially born in June of 2012 after 2 years of preparations. There was a bill passed in 2013 by the General Assembly requiring the State Board to share our voter registration and voter registration history with our neighboring states. This is the first law aimed at directly sharing data with neighboring states. Virginia uses our ERIC data for 5 main purposes. Individuals who are registered in Virginia and move out to another state helps us to locate them and be able to cancel them. Voters who move their residence within the Commonwealth itself and did not update their address helps us to find mistakes in the data, errors, outdated information, just simple data entry errors. Helps us to get those corrected. It is used to identify individuals who have moved into Virginia and are eligible to vote and have remained unregistered for certain periods of time after establishing residency here. It is also used as a way of determining the people who are now deceased and allows the states to cancel those records from the voter rolls. The Interstate Crosscheck List, which was founded in 2005 through a bipartisan effort of members of the Secretaries of State in Kansas and Missouri, originally consisted of just Midwest states and has steadily grown out of the Midwest. Kentucky and Tennessee are neighboring Virginia states, and they are now participating. In 2013, the crosscheck, a total of 22 states participated in the program, sharing over 84 million voter registration records. In Virginia, we identified in the 2013 crosscheck 80,000 records that had the high probability of having an exact match with individuals registered in multiple states. Of those matches, General Registrars removed about 23,000 of them from the voter rolls through normal cancellation procedures. So we had already been working on it from the time that the state received the data until they provided it to us, and we had already canceled them. Cancellations of this sort are direct notifications from other states, the voter themselves, or from a process that we use through the post office. Of the approximately 57,000 registered voters provided to us to review and take action on, there were 57,000. Approximately 30,000 of those voters were identified as already having been inactive, and by election day, registrars had removed 38,870 records. The cross-check removal of names became controversial prior to the 2013 election. I was one of those because I felt the timing of receiving the list was too close to an election for us to just simply be removing people because we didn't have the time to work with the data. And then, of course, I was instructed that I had to take action on it, which I did and took our people off. We did have people come in on election day that we had removed, and we simply reinstated them, put them back on the records. The other list maintenance processes that Virginia uses are ways of getting rid of deceased voters using the National Technical Information Services. The state provides a monthly update to the master death index from the Social Security. They use the Virginia Department of Health to provide monthly file from the Bureau of Vital Statistics. And then there is an annual death verification that the state used in August, and they submitted the entire voter list to this vendor because they had expertise in processing death records. And it resulted in them finding 2,981 names still on the records that then were sent out to the Virginia localities to see if they were real matches and to remove them. We also have a program by which the state works with the Virginia State Police, and there is a monthly file listing of all felony convictions in the Commonwealth for the previous month. Again, in August of 2013, the State Board received the entire felon list from the previous year, which included 18 million records, and there were 789 records identified. My feeling on this might be that maybe the people might not have been registered at the time the first check was done, and then they registered the next time, and that's how they ended up back in there. They receive information from courts, both federal and Virginia, by paper records are sent electronically to the state regarding felony convictions, and then the clerk of the court provides information regarding people who have been adjudicated to be mentally incompetent through a court process. We also deal with non-citizens, and this data is provided on a monthly report from the State Board of Elections, and that is anybody that registers to vote at the Department of Motor Vehicles and indicates that they're not a citizen. That information is sent to the state and shared with us, and then we do some corresponding with the voter to get them to affirm that they are citizens before we actually remove them from the record. In a Social Security number audit, information received August 2013 from the death verification, there were approximately 5,100 voters that the state identified as potentially being on the records with the wrong Social Security number. Again, that is something that the state sends out to the local jurisdictions for us to review and to go ahead and see if we can't fix those. Usually they result in just simple data entry errors. In conclusion, I believe Virginia is working on or already participating in programs discussed in the Presidential Commission study and will continue to do so. Virginia has worked with our neighboring states and now has them all on board to participate in either the ERIC or the cross-check programs. And I would encourage all other states to do the same thing. For these programs to be successful, however, state and local governments will need to be provided the adequate resources necessary to continue, and routine education of everyone, local election officials, DMV, other agencies and entities, and the public of the processes and procedures can help the list maintenance issues.
Thank you, Judy. Do you want to answer questions now, or you want to go down to Kimball and we'll cover your, why don't we go and cover your presentation, then we'll come back and, yeah.
All right, thank you, Leslie. First of all, I just wanted to find out how many people here are Washington Capitol fans? You know, your coach and your general manager was fired this morning. I'm just bringing you news from the outside. I just wanted to let you be aware of that. So there's change everywhere. So, what I wanted to talk first off about is a little bit of what premised the whole Presidential Commission report and also premises what's going on in this country. And that's the election administration process that we have. There's one word that really describes it best, and that is diversity. We are very diverse in the way we run elections. We have 50 states. Each of them have their own separate election laws. And those states, they change those laws periodically, so we have to adapt to them. But they are different in a lot of different ways. Now, states don't really run elections. Elections are run down at the local level, at the county level. There's over 3,000 counties in this country. And in many instances, they implement those state laws slightly different within their own state sometimes. So there's diversity in that sense. We also have up in New England, we have not county-run government, but township-run government. And cities up there. There's over 1,500, 1,600 jurisdictions up there. And then the state of Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin, they also run elections at the township level. And there's over 5,000 jurisdictions in just those 3 states. So overall, we have 10,072 election jurisdictions, or jurisdictions in this country that conduct elections. Now, with that premise, what do you think is the mean size of a jurisdiction in this country? Anybody want to say a number in terms of number of registered voters in the, how many? 500,000? Way, way high. 20,000? That's still high. 5,000? That's still high. The average size of a jurisdiction is 1,492 registered voters in this country. We are small. All of our offices are small. What you have here before you are the abnormal jurisdictions. Most jurisdictions are very, very tiny. There's over 1/3 of the nation's counties that have fewer than 10,000 registered voters. Over 1/3. Half of the nation's counties have fewer than 16,000 registered voters. There's only 403 jurisdictions in this country that have more than 100,000 registered voters. Only 403. 3 of them are right here, so there's only 400 elsewhere around the country. There's only 15 counties in this nation that have more than 1 million registered voters. Los Angeles is the biggest, with 4.7 million registered voters. The smallest jurisdiction in this country is Loving, Texas. It has 137 people in that county. And that's it. So as a result, from an election standpoint, what you have is so many jurisdictions, lots of people that run elections, but the key is they don't have a lot of people in them. So in fact, when you look at, there's 44% of the nations that have less than 1,000 registered voters of the nation's jurisdictions, 44%. But that only amounts to 0.8% of all registered voters in this country. On the flip side, with 15 jurisdictions that have more than 1 million, that's 15% of the jurisdictions, but they amount to almost 14% of the registered voters in this county, in this country. So you see there's a great dichotomy and a big difference in size of jurisdictions and how many registered voters there are. So there's a wide range of diversity, and that's what the Presidential Commission was really caught with. There is so much difference in this country. How do you prescribe a solution? There is no solution because there's so much diversity. There's no one solution. So what the Presidential Commission did is similar to what we did in Prince William County, where I was part of the task force investigating the long lines issue. We looked at, and the Presidential Commission looks at the data to try to figure out and look at different circumstances of how people have implemented things. We in Prince William County, we've got 77 precincts in our county for dealing with all 250,000 registered voters. Well, in looking at those precincts in the 2012 election, we had a number of those precincts that were over 5,000 people in an individual precinct. The precinct that had the last voter voting in the November election was River Oaks precinct. They had over 5,300 registered voters, and they went 3.5 hours late. The last voter voted at 10:45 in that precinct when we closed at 7 o'clock. So we saw from the county standpoint, we had precincts that were too large. And part of the recommendation of the task force was to go back and recreate some of these precincts and make them smaller, make more of them. And so part of when I left the task force, I unfortunately was then selected to be the acting registrar of voters. I don't know why the heck I do this, but so I ended up looking at immediately, how do we implement some of these circumstances? And what we ended up doing is we ended up ultimately adding about 14, 15 precincts. So we'll be now up at about 93 precincts for this coming November. We've revised a lot of those precincts, and now no precinct will have more than 4,000 registered voters. So that is going to be a significant circumstance. Now, from the standpoint of implementing that, how do you tell people that they go to a new polling place? That's going to be the interesting circumstance. So from Prince William's standpoint, we're going to call on Carol, and we're going to ask all other League of Women Voter Helpers to help get the word out on that. And that's part of what we're going to end up needing to do to get people to understand, hey, you might have a new polling place. But the whole goal was to try to cut down the size of those precincts so that our poll workers could handle the load better. I serve as a poll worker. I've done work with federal government, state government, local governments all around the nation dealing with election administration. But as I say, I digressed in my education and became a poll worker. So I've been out there for almost a decade now, working in the polling places in various places in Prince William to try to understand what's going on and work that side of the process. Part of the reason why I got appointed to the Presidential Commission, because I'm a data geek. I'm probably the original data geek, I think, from that side. And so as a result, part of what I was doing, even when we weren't keeping track of numbers, I was keeping track of them in my precinct. And I was trying to figure out how many people showed up every half hour. And I kept a log of that and looked at that each election I worked. And I would send that information after the election day to Betty, the Registrar of Voters, and she'd look at it and she found interesting things in it, but this is this geeky guy that keeps on sending her spreadsheets of data after election kind of a thing. But that circumstance of the November election suddenly let me, from the task force's standpoint, be able to look at every single precinct in the county from that in that regard. And we were able to pull out of the electronic voter registration files what was the check-in time for every individual voter. And we could then look at every hour for every precinct, what is the workload that goes on there. And when you look at that data, you discover that it's different in every single precinct. We're a suburban community. We got a lot of people that drive downtown to DC. We ended up having a lot of people that come in early in the morning, and then a whole bunch of people that waited until they came back. Well, one of the things that I noticed as a poll worker is that indeed, when we had that ice storm, if you remember in 2008, on election day, people couldn't get back down to Prince William to vote. And that next election, man, we had lots of people in that early morning hour. They learned their lesson. Come and vote early. We're not in Chicago, so it's not early and often, but come and vote early. So that was part of the thing in looking at what was taking place in 2012 of what was that makeup of the voters and what was the makeup of the precinct. One of the things I implemented then is we created a spreadsheet of this information for every precinct, and we provided that to the precinct judge so that they understood in their own precinct what had happened this last election. And it was part of our training that we did for the next election in 2013. Giving data out to people became real important for them to understand what was going on. We also had a lot of people that are turning out that we didn't anticipate. We had a large surge, as most jurisdictions do, in September, October, large surge of people registering at the last minute. We also had a lot of people that ended up being inactive because of the moves and that sort of thing, like Judy was talking about. For the first time, we looked at and found that 11.4% of people that were categorized as inactive actually showed up on election day. Nowhere else in this country keeps that kind of number. And it's something that I've tried to push people to look at your data and see what that is, because that extra 11%, particularly those inactive voters that suddenly have to be handled separately. They come in, they're not marked on the polling place as a regular voter. They've got to get special attention. We found as a task force that any time you had to send the voter to the chief to deal with those kind of special circumstances, that's what drove the problem of the long lines, because you just had extra kind of circumstances. And the presidential task force saw that and recognized that also. So, and that's why, as Judy pointed out, the listserv is so important. So there's a lot of things that come into play. But precinct size and being able to handle the voters in an appropriate way is part of the key of what we learned in Prince William. We have gone forward and are implementing a bunch of other things, including we've made the decision now to change from electronic from electronic voting machines now to paper ballots. So we will be implementing that in November of this year. There again, we have to be careful on how we get people to understand what they're doing. This is a new process. One of the problems that you find nationwide is that voters in this country have a habit of fouling up their ballot pretty well. We discovered that in Florida, right? Well, they do it more so on paper ballots because you don't have that automatic check of the overvote circumstance. And so part of the issue when implementing paper ballot circumstances is to make sure your training process really highlights to voters, you've got to make sure and check your ballot and highlight to the election officials that are manning those polling places to understand what happens when that ballot kicks back out from the scanner. I've looked at and followed elections all across the country, as I said. I've been in over 300 jurisdictions on election day to watch the process around the country. And the thing that scares me more than anything else is going into a precinct and seeing that ballot come back and the election judge telling the voter, oh, just put it back in and it'll count. It's okay. Or the voter saying, I don't have enough time. I just spent 5 minutes filling out the ballot and now you want me to go back and do it again? I don't have time, so just let it go forward. They're nullifying their votes, at least for that particular office. So part of the key in making a change in voting equipment is make sure that you've got heavy education process, heavy training process to make sure that those kind of circumstances don't happen in your jurisdiction. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing in Prince William County. Well, there we go.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for being out here today, and I want to appreciate the fact that we were asked to be on this panel. It's very, very interesting to be able to hear my colleagues and seeing how similar things were in Fairfax as they were across other parts of the Commonwealth. I think Kim's point that he made in the very beginning, I want to reiterate. If you look at Virginia, the difference in size in jurisdictions in Virginia is pretty crazy. At the low end, the smallest jurisdiction in Virginia, at least election-wise, is Norton City, which is down in the far southwest part of the state. It's fully surrounded by Wise County. They have one precinct. They have 3,400 people in their entire city, and they had about 1,000 voters on Election Day in November of 2013. On the other end is me, Fairfax County. We have 238 precincts. We are the largest jurisdiction in Virginia. I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 700,000 registered voters, and we had about 315,000 folks show up on Election Day in November of 2013. We, like Prince William and Loudoun, also had issues with long lines in 2012, and I was part of the Bipartisan Commission process that we set up in Fairfax to review that. Now, a lot of the stuff that was in the Presidential Commission was also found in our report. It's also found in the Prince William report, which tells me that we're all on the same page because the similar problems happen across the country. The one issue for me that keeps me up at night, given the size of Fairfax County and the size of the jurisdiction that we have, is our election officers. The bottom line for me, and if you look at our report, there are a lot of different things that contributed to the long lines in 2012 in Fairfax. But I think the number one thing that could have solved many of these problems was more staff, better trained staff, and folks who were committed to getting people through the line quickly and understood the process and their role. Technology can help, but at the end of the day, the number one and most important and best protector of the voting process, the best facilitator and efficiency creator of the voting process is the individual election officer who's sitting at that desk or who's working at that precinct. And that's why we place such a premium on going out and recruiting folks. The problem is we don't pay them very much. It's a very long day. It's not fun. I had a joke when we were doing one of our training last year. I said, please tell your friends, especially tell your enemies, come out and become an election officer. Because it is a long day, and you're looking forward to 15 hours of hard work. We do allow split shifts for election officers, but for our chiefs and for our assistant chiefs, they are by law required to be in the precinct all day long. So you're signing up for a 15-hour gig, and that doesn't include the training that you're going to do ahead of time. All of our chiefs and assistant chiefs are required by law to have training prior to the election. We try to make sure that all of our election officers are trained at least once every 2 years and that they have access to refresher training whenever they want it so that they know how to do things. We're in the process right now of buying all new election equipment, all new voting equipment in Fairfax that we hope to have in place by the November election. So all of our folks are going to have to come in for training. But if you look at our statistics, right now, based on the numbers that I've seen most recently, the average age nationally, and Kim and I were talking about this at lunch, of election officers is 62. In Fairfax County, 30% of our election officers are over the age of 70. On the opposite side of that, only 15% of our election officers are under the age of 50. So the sweet spot for our election officers is folks between the ages of 50 and 70, a lot of whom are in the 65 area, folks who are retired who can afford to take a day off in the fall or in June or in May, because one of the things about Virginia is we are for lovers, we're also for lovers of elections, because we have one every couple months. And we joke that we're always going to get to something after the election, and the problem was every time after the election is 2 months before the next one. So it's very difficult for us to be able to do a lot of those the downtime things we'd like to do, because there's always an election to plan. For example, I have an election in 2 weeks. We have Herndon, Clifton, and Vienna Town Council elections on May 6th. And then a month later, I have a Democratic primary in the 8th Congressional District. That's going to take effect 78 of my precincts on the eastern part of Fairfax County. That's on June 10th. And then I have a couple of months off, and then we go into election season for the federal elections in the fall, where it looks like we're going to have 2 open seat competitive races in the 10th and the 8th District, as well as a competitive Senate race. So even when I think maybe we'll get lucky and have an election that's not going to be that tough, circumstances will always step in there. And unfortunately, or fortunately for us, depending on how you view it, we've managed to have a number of folks from Fairfax County elected to statewide office, which has freed up local elections. So we've had special elections after every November election the last 2 cycles. So there's no real break. And that means for our election officers, we are constantly returning to them and asking, I need you for the next election. I need you for the next election. Can you do the next election? One of the things we did in the bipartisan commission process, and this is one of the things that I pushed pretty hard before I got on the electoral board, and then thankfully I was able to fix it while I was on the board, was looking at pay. We were paying $100 a day for election officers in Fairfax County prior to when I took over the board. If you do the math, you take 100, you divide that by 15, we were not paying minimum wage to our workers. That bothered me, especially for the amount of work and the importance of the process. So one of the first things we did when I got into office was I said, look, we got to raise pay. So we got the pay up to $175 a day for our election officers. Our chiefs are paid $250, and our assistant chiefs are paid $200. And that actually, I think, had an impact on recruiting, particularly young people. We noticed that for a lot of we have a high school page program where folks can get their volunteer hours that they're required to by Fairfax County Public Schools to graduate. They can get some of their hours by doing civil service, and one of the things they do is they help us out in precincts, particularly the ones in high schools or in local schools. And we noticed that quite a few of the folks who were turning 18 before Election Day, instead of being part of the page program, signed up to be election officers. At $175 for a day's worth of work they were going to do for free anyway was a nice way to get them out there. And it's great for us because those folks, particularly with the increase in technology that we're seeing, we can put them on the front lines and they can get folks through the lines very quickly, where otherwise it would have taken a little bit longer. One of the things that we're focusing on, and one of the things I think the Presidential Commission pointed out, was technology is critical in solving some of these problems, but at the same time, you have to recognize that technology can be a barrier to some folks wanting to do it. Not everybody is as comfortable sitting in front of a computer as someone my age or Alex who works in our office's age or some of the younger folks in the room. And they you get nervous. Folks get nervous. They don't want to be put in a position where they feel like everybody's waiting on them to figure something out. So they want to do something else in the process that doesn't involve the computer. Well, there's not much in a polling place now that doesn't involve some kind of equipment, whether you're working on a piece of the scanners, if you're working the front door. We have folks with devices that are able to check and tell people if they're in the right precinct. We've got a mobile app that our folks can download from Fairfax County that lets them check their voter registration status, get a link to their closest polling location where they're supposed to vote, and all of that stuff. So we have a lot of technology in the precincts designed to help things, and that doesn't always speed up the process. Sometimes it can slow it down, particularly when we're trying to make sure that folks understand how they're doing, how they need to do what they're doing. So we're doing our best to try to recruit election officers who are comfortable with technology. One of the other issues we have in Fairfax is we've got a large number of voters, particularly in the eastern and southern parts of the county, that have limited English proficiency. We are a covered jurisdiction under the Voting Rights Act, Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act for Spanish. So all of our election materials have to be translated in English and Spanish. Now I get angry calls from some folks saying, why are you putting the stuff in Spanish? I'm like, sorry guys, Justice Department says I have to do it. I don't have a choice. But the reality is what I would like to see is people saying, that's great. These folks have a better opportunity to vote properly and have their rights protected because they're reading it in a language that they understand better. And that's why I try to convince the folks, especially folks on my side of the aisle, that translating materials is a great idea because it helps people stop from being taken advantage of by unscrupulous people. Now the problem really is, in addition to simply having the language on the ballot, we also have to translate all of our election materials, but it's also important to have somebody in the polls that speaks that language, and that's not always possible. So we've tried to place a high emphasis on recruiting election officers who are bilingual, and not just in Spanish. We have a very large Asian population in Fairfax County. We have a large Korean community. We have a large Vietnamese community. We have a very large Indian community and Middle Eastern community, and those languages are tough to find folks who are willing to come out and to volunteer. We had looked at trying to pay extra for language proficiency. We couldn't figure out a way to do that in a way that was fair, that wouldn't have placed a massive burden on my staff to figure out, all right, does this person really know how to speak that language, or are they coming in for the extra $25? So we ended up not doing that and just giving everybody a pay raise and hoping that that would entice more folks in. I know, these are the issues that we work through in this business. But the reality for us is we have to recruit and keep up a very large number of election officers. We're talking on a general election in Fairfax, we try to have a minimum of 10 election workers per precinct, and that means we need to have at least 2,300 to 2,500 folks out there on election day. That's hard. We have full-time, we just were able to convince the Board of Supervisors to provide us with funding for a full-time election officer recruiting position. And that person is their goal is going to be to make sure we constantly have that churn of folks coming in. We have some of our veterans who do every election. We have some folks who do it once and say, I'm never doing that again, I'm done, I'm out of here. So we constantly have to keep refilling that bucket of officers. One of the other problems, it's not really a problem, it actually can be a benefit if we work it properly, is the political parties in Virginia have a very large say in the process of who gets to be an election officer, because the Democrats and the Republicans both provide electoral boards with lists of folks who they are recommending that they are nominating to become election officers. And they get, and at least in Fairfax, they get a veto over who gets to represent the party on election day. So the Democratic Party goes through and they'll review their list of voters and make sure that everybody on that list who's representing the Democratic Party is a Democrat, and the Republicans do the same thing. In some other jurisdictions, the parties aren't as jealous of their rights in that regard, and they are more than happy to let folks flip parties whenever they want to. That's not the case in Fairfax. Our parties are very highly active, and they want only folks of their political persuasion representing the party on election day. So that adds an extra wrinkle for us, because we're constantly having to make sure when we go out and recruit that we're recruiting not just based on age and based on location and precinct, but also based on partisan background, so that we have a good mix, so that we have folks who are willing to fill those roles and that they're acceptable to the party. We're in the middle of litigation right now because we didn't do a good job of that in 2012, and we got sued, so we're trying to do our best to make sure that we do that the right way. So at least in Fairfax, and I think across the Commonwealth, election officer recruitment is a critical and very important thing, and I think it plays a very major role in the successful running and administration of elections on election day. And I think that's the one issue more than anything that keeps me up at night, is making sure that we have enough folks out there. And I think if we do that well, a lot of these other issues that are out there are not insurmountable, and they tend to fall in line. But you got to make sure that you put people first, and I think that's something that we've been doing pretty well here in Fairfax since 2012, and I'm hoping that that'll manifest itself in the 2016 presidential election, which will really be our test case, because everything we've done since 2012 has been designed to make sure 2016 runs flawlessly, and I'm hoping that I will still be around to see if that happens. So,
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to run through one quick question for each of the panelists to try to clarify some things for myself, and then we can take questions from the audience, and I'll play Vanna, and I'll walk around with the microphone. Judy, when you were talking about the list maintenance procedures that you go through based on information that you get from other jurisdictions, and I know for a long time Virginia was able to use information from other jurisdictions, but you weren't able to share your information with other jurisdictions. So I'm glad that with the cross-check program and the ERIC program, you're able to do that. And I think Virginia has a much bigger advantage than a lot of other states, because you can use the full Social Security number. You require the full Social Security number when somebody registers to vote. So your lists are actually much better and without duplication within your own statewide voter registration list to a large degree. But when you talk about the list maintenance and you say that when you get information from other states and you were told to remove names from the list, were you actually removing or placing them in an inactive status?
When we got the information from the cross-check list from the state, we were looking at a list that actually was cross-checked with several other states, and it gave us a registration date. So basically, we were removing them, not just putting them on inactive status. If it appeared that they registered to vote in the other state after they had been in our after they registered in our jurisdiction, then it was assumed that they registered someplace else and therefore needed to be removed from the records. What I did in my locality, though, is I did send a letter to each of the individuals to both the address in my jurisdiction and in the other state to let them know that they were being or had been removed from the records. And of course, again, that's when the phone calls came in. I truly believe another education piece is a lot of people had moved away, but they had come back. And simply one of our processes at the DMV was a re-registration. We didn't want to accept, if they were already on the records, have them decline the application. There's no need for them to register again. We didn't want all these duplicate registrations. And so we changed our policy there so that we accepted them, because it appeared that some people moved away, registered in another state, came back to Virginia. We still had them on the records, so they were still registered here, so they took no action. And so I think it needs to be made clear to people that if you moved away and you came back, you do need to re-register again, even if your name's still on there, just to get your new registration date in the system to avoid us removing you from the records.
Thank you. Kimball, a lot of the information that you shared with us sounds like it's going to require a relatively large price tag. Voter education, I know, is very expensive and is sort of one of those soft expenses that's sort of hard to put a number on because you aren't getting a lot of equipment quotes and things like that. So, and when I read through your commission report too, I just wrote down dollar signs. So, have you received additional funding to be able to make the changes for finding new polling places and educating voters and getting new equipment?
Yes, and we found the key to be able to do that. Have a foul up.
Right.
When you have a foul up, suddenly the money starts appearing because our supervisors didn't want to be in the news again because of that. So we were able to turn that around and make it to our advantage. We did get, shortly after the November election, when we went for more voting equipment or different voting equipment, that was part of the key, is that we had to make the change because of the problem we had, and we got $1.5 million from the county to be able to purchase the new voting equipment. Now, thank heavens, the voting equipment costs are starting to come down. I mean, I've followed voting equipment for 30 years, very high, always has been, but they're starting to come down as they're seeing that people don't have the money to buy a $5,000 piece of equipment all the time. And so they're coming down, and so we're actually benefiting from that in being able to stretch our 1.5 million more so that we can use it to do some of the other stuff. And that's where we're going to end up helping to pay for better education efforts and that sort of thing. One of the things that we've ended up doing also is doing a lot of video pieces of training that we put up on our website. We keep each of those video pieces at no more than 5 minutes apiece, because you don't want somebody sitting there on the web and, Jesus is going to go on and on and on. Just do little ones that are just 5 minutes. This is how you set up a machine. Another one, this is how you man the polling place. All of those kind of things can be done in short periods of time, and by having them up on our web, then all of our election officials can, at their leisure, come and look at those videos without having to sit in classrooms all the time. So we're trying to use as much as we can to try to do a better job from that side.
Brian, the conversation about the poll workers, it's interesting to me because in Arlington, I can't imagine it would have never occurred to me or anybody in my polling place not to show up. So I can't imagine that happening. And so I'm sorry for that. One of the Presidential Commission recommendations was that, and oh, by the way, you pay much better than Arlington. So we'll be coming, any extra help you might need, just let us know. One of the commission recommendations was to utilize state and county employees, and I don't know if you're allowed to in Virginia, number one. And number two, the task force had a large number of advocacy and other stakeholder organizations that had people who represent people with minority languages, speakers and things of that nature. So do you utilize those? Do you utilize kids in high school that may have, like 4-year Spanish classes or something along those lines?
No, absolutely. One of the good things with the county is that they typically allow liberal leave on election day for folks if they want to volunteer. And one of the things we do is we will send out email recruitment messages to everybody in the county government saying, hey, if you want to be an election officer, come, please do it. And I think a large number of folks take advantage of that because it's a service. And typically, in addition to that, I mean, the pay is not bad for a day's work. And for folks who are going to be there anyway, you're going to go out and you want to be part of the process. It's an easy way to volunteer, and while it can be frequent, it's not every day. So I think, at least for the folks in the county government and who typically will see the results of what happens when you vote, that it's important for them to get out there and do that. And high school is absolutely, that's the number one place where we get our bilingual and trilingual election officers and pages. And one of the things we do is folks who sign up who have that language proficiency, we make sure we target those into the precincts that we know across the county that have large numbers of folks with limited English proficiency, so that we make sure we're getting folks where they need to be in the right place. We also make sure that we have a language line staffed in the office, so that in the event that we have to, a chief or an assistant chief can pull somebody out of line, call the office, and have someone translate it. And I think we had some ridiculously large number of languages supported. I think it was in the 40s or 50s that we had supported last election. Fortunately, that line did not get a lot of use because we had provided enough crib sheets for folks for the major languages that they were able to point to. If this is your question, here's the answer, and it's in this language, and they could point. I mean, that literally is what we did, and that worked pretty well. But there's no real substitute to having somebody physically present that can answer your every question and be able to do it in a quick manner and get folks through the line faster.
All right, Vanna.
All right, I'm happy. Here I go. Oh,
1 minute. I should have been doing this while he was getting ready. Hi, I'm Linda Garveling from Falls Church, and I'd just like to ask all of you what you think the prospects are for internet banking. And just to give you my background on that, internet, I know I was going to say, I knew I was going to say that because that's what I compare it to, but internet voting, because my background is, my husband was foreign service, and even when you're in an embassy with military mail, APO, it still takes a long time. And I was especially sensitive, the elections I was overseas, to the missionaries and the private business people who were there, how they would get to vote. Some would even schedule their home leads or R&R to be back to vote. That's how important it was for them. Thank you.
Okay, my opinion is I don't think that it's anywhere close. Currently we do have the capability of sending the ballot to the individual by email so that they get it faster, but now they still have to mail it back to us, and we have to receive it by the day of the election. We have been doing email ballots, it's been a while now, and the state actually also has a program with Democracy Live where we could actually email the individual, let them know the ballot's ready whenever they're ready to download. In Loudoun, I prefer right now to still email each individual one at a time to get them their ballot.
That particular question is one that is going around the country, that a lot of people are dealing with it. A lot of the activists are not comfortable with internet voting, but I'll tell you what, with the military department, as you said, the DOD, they are funding some efforts to take a look at that and experiment with that now. So I think eventually we'll ultimately have at least some degree of internet, whether or not it's full-scale voting. I think it's too early to tell right yet.
I'm far more cynical than my panel colleagues. I don't think it's ever going to happen, and I'll be honest. I think that the real issue is, at least for, and I hate to turn this into a partisan thing, but I think it's true, at least on the Republican side, the cynicism and the level of concern about hacking and potential damage. I can't even convince folks on my side of the aisle to let me turn on the internet Wi-Fi and the poll books to send data back to the office on election day, for fear that somebody could hack in and do something to the poll book. Not even the actual voting machine, but the poll book itself. And so any kind of networking or any kind of internet connectivity on election day just sends up all kinds of alarm bells in the minds of some of the folks, at least on my side of the aisle. And frankly, I think it's not just a Republican thing. I know a number of my Democratic colleagues are also concerned about making sure that this stuff is secure. And given some of the level of data breaches that we've seen, Target or Heartbreaker, some of the other ones that have happened, I think that always it's always going to be in the back of somebody's mind. So I think, frankly, at this point, if it happens, I think, as Kim said, it's going to be many, many years down the road. You're going to have to really get a generational change in folks that are more less concerned about the hacking and more comfortable with across internet transactions for this to happen, and I don't think we're there yet.
Thank you.
My name is Tom Fina, and I was involved both at the local level as a chief elections officer in Fairfax County and in the enactment of the HAVA when I was representing the Democratic Party abroad. There are some 6 million Americans who are eligible to vote abroad. And one of the questions that Kimball Brace has dealt with is the tremendous diversity of the election districts. And one of the things that we asked for was the centralization of data on overseas citizens, the registration of overseas citizens at one central spot because of this tremendous diversity, and the issuance of ballots from a single spot, as well as their counting at the end. My impression is that overseas citizens are pretty much being neglected and dropped, and I noticed that none of our speakers today spoke about this overseas constituency, which isn't around to complain very much when things don't go rightly for them. I'd be interested to know what you think about the possibility of improving the access of overseas Americans to the ballot box.
I thought you looked familiar. I do. I just want to address something very quickly, and I think that the folks on the panel will probably agree that there has been a lot of progress in military and overseas voting, and I apologize that we didn't talk about it, but we were really sort of focused on polling place management issues, so it wouldn't have impacted military and overseas voters. But online voter registration has a big impact on improving the process for military and overseas voters. As Judy was talking about, emailing the ballots out to, as a result of the Federal MOVE Act, emailing ballots is now a capability that all jurisdictions have to figure out a way to do, and I think many of them also, as in Virginia, they have a centralized program where Judy was referencing. You can, as a military or overseas voter, you can contact them and they can download your ballot online for you. So I think there are significant improvements, and I'm sorry that we didn't address them for you.
There's also been a move backward with the enactment of the law you were talking about, which allows ballots to be transmitted by email.
Mm-hmm.
It was also reduced to a one federal election cycle. In the HAVA, we had finally convinced the Republicans to accept 2 federal election cycles as the registration period for overseas and military voters. That got rolled back. I was looking the other way. I was no longer in the job. I don't know how it happened, but it seems to me that was a major step backward in providing accessibility to military and overseas voters.
There is some new federal legislation that is being proposed by Senator Schumer and Senator Cornyn, and on the House side by Congressman McCarthy from California and Congresswoman Susan Davis, which does address that issue. I think a lot of the election administrators, and I will pass this down so they can actually speak for themselves, but I think a lot of them were concerned that 2 federal elections, especially for some in the military, ended up with bad and old addresses. And so you were sending ballots to people when they weren't there anymore, so you were actually disenfranchising some of those people.
Statistics don't seem to support that.
Well, Okay, you can argue with him.
Okay. Well, I have a couple comments on it, and I feel exactly the same way that you do. I think that by going back and changing your dates from 2 years to 1 year, it's very confusing for people because they don't know. I know in Loudoun County in particular, in the 2012 election, the year before is when most of our people who had been on the list dropped off the list. So they had no idea that they had to reapply to be able to get their presidential ballot. And I started, and again, as Brian had said, sometimes you start something and then something else comes up and you just lose track of it, trying to reach out to all of them saying, you know, your application has expired, you need to submit a new application, so that they're aware of it. So I'm hoping that maybe if they just have to get into the habit of doing it once a year, to reapply to get their ballot, will be a friendly reminder to them, and that they don't lose out at a certain point and they're not aware of it. One of the big issues that I now have is that I found out during the presidential election is that those people that we send the email ballots to, the state board is providing the email addresses to the political parties to reach out to these folks. And I had a lot of nasty emails from people overseas because we were giving out their email addresses. I had started seeing a lot of bounce back emails because I think people closed out their emails because they didn't want that information from political parties coming to them. And some told me, okay, I'm changing it. This is my new one. Don't give it out to anybody. I even approached or had my electoral board approach Senator Black here in Virginia to try to introduce legislation that either prohibited the state board from giving it to them or put a checkbox on the application or somehow where they had to check something that said we could give it out. Because I think that although we do things to improve our process, that some of these things are going to hinder it and cause people to want us to mail their ballot because they don't want us giving out the email. So I feel the same way that you do about the overseas people, but I can tell you in Loudoun, I personally send the email to each and every one of it and spend a whole day sometimes having to do that. But I do think that it's very important for the people who are overseas to get their ballot. I have thought several times about different things that we can do to improve because we get a lot of the ballots back after the election. And it appears they mailed it on the day of the election. So maybe there's a misconception that they can't vote until election day. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, these are just some of the thoughts that I have, so that if we better educated the people that we were dealing with so that they understood it does need to be back here by the day of the election. It's in the instructions, but that's just my take on it. But yes, I think they should be things that we can do to improve the process. I'm just not sure I have the power to do it alone.
I'm the person that ended up starting with the EAC and getting their survey done, and ran it for the first 2 cycles and then subcontracting for the next 3. One of the key things that we were seeing in the numbers, particularly on the overseas, was the very large degree of ballots that were coming back as undeliverable. And it was where we sent out ballots and they just didn't get to the person. And it came back as undeliverable. And there was a very large amount at that point in time. That was why, part of the reason why MOVE came along to try to start doing that. But that part of that was also what we were hearing from local election officials is that a bunch of that information was going out and just not getting there or coming back as non-deliverable, and that's part of the reason why they went from 2 years down to 1 year. And so that was a direct result of that sort of thing.
Anecdotally, from what happened with us last fall, one of the things we noticed, we had about 500 provisional ballots cast in Fairfax during the November 2013 general election, and the vast majority of folks who had the issues and were required to vote provisionally were overseas voters, military and foreign service, who had requested using the federal absentee ballot postcard prior to the 2012 general election and didn't realize it was good for 2 years. So we automatically sent them a second ballot for the November 2013 general election. They never received it, or they didn't even realize that it had been sent. They came back, they were in the states, they came to their polling place, they tried to vote, and they couldn't vote. One of the things anecdotally that we found when we were talking to folks, particularly in the Army, was that email addresses in the Army are apparently, at least in this, and don't hold me to this if it's not accurate, but this is what we were told at the time, was that many of the email addresses in the Army are good for that service position that you're in at the time, and that when you go to a new site, a new fort, wherever you're, I'm a Navy guy, we don't do it this way, you go, you go somewhere else and the email address doesn't track with you. So we were sending emails to folks, to accounts that had been closed because they had moved on to a new duty assignment. In the Foreign Service, we had a lot of good information from folks coming back. I was very happy to hear about some of the things. We actually had an ambassador himself who had to vote provisionally on Election Day because he had fallen prey to this exact same thing. And I was very heartened to hear how overseas, particularly, it's a big deal. Election Day is treated like a big deal. They would have things in the embassies where they would get everybody together and they'd all vote their absentees in the same day and then mail them in. And it was treated like an election day over here, and they really cared. So I think it's incumbent upon us to do a better job of making sure that we're servicing those folks overseas. The problem with trying to do it from a centralized way is you're going to fall prey to the same patchwork that we deal with now. You've got 50 different states with 50 different sets of election laws and 140, just in Virginia, 144 different jurisdictions with different rules and different registrars, and you're trying to do all that at the same time. It's very difficult to do that. But I honestly think that the 1 year is probably better than extending it out longer, because for folks who most voters, especially overseas voters, I think are probably going to fall into the active voter category where they're going to vote almost every election, regardless of whether it's a federal or a state or presidential. But even then, they're only voting once a year, or it's not something that's in the front of your mind all the time. And if you sign up for something for 4 years and it only happens once a year, I'll tell you right now, it's for me, it's like I always constantly have to remember to get my license and registration redone, because it's only something I think about every 2 years. And you make it that way, and it's hard for folks if they don't have a tickler file for when they got to do certain things. So I think in the end, we absolutely have to do a better job of servicing our overseas voters, but it's not an easy thing to do.
Thank you. Hi, Carol Noggle, and I do live in Prince William County and learned a huge amount in that 2012 election. But going back to the Presidential Commission here, I'm just wondering if you have any idea if there's going to be any federal legislation or state legislation that may come out of that.
Thank you. I can answer the federal legislation part if somebody else wants to take on the state. There currently is legislation introduced in the Senate and in the House prior to the commission even starting that addressed many of these issues, the line and number of bills that may or may not go anywhere. There is legislation being drafted by Senator Schumer, who is the chair of the Senate Rules Committee, specific to this commission report. And he's held a number of hearings in the Senate on this. But he hasn't actually introduced the legislation, and we haven't actually seen any language yet. And quite frankly, the commission made it very clear every time they had a hearing and when they went up to the Hill and reported to the Senate Rules Committee that their purpose and their charge was not to create a report that was to develop federal legislation. The things that you find in this commission report are best practices based on things that already exist in all the states. And so what they were doing with this report was really sort of using a megaphone to articulate what may work best for a particular jurisdiction, and giving some suggested ways that they could do that and giving them other resources. And so I don't know, federal legislation in the Senate side may come. I don't know that there is anything in the House that will come from it, though.
On the state level, one of the things that you will find is state legislators love election law changes. And you will see hundreds and literally hundreds of bills dropped every single year on various election-related issues. The vast majority of those don't go anywhere. The Privileges Elections Committee in the House is very good at killing almost every piece of legislation, even the good ones. We've been fighting for a long time to try to get full-time registrars in every county in Virginia, and that requires money. We still have 16 jurisdictions that have part-time registrars. We've been pushing for a lot of different minor changes, minor tweaks to the law, including a lot of changes based on new technology. There are sections of the Virginia Code that refer to telegraph, refer to telephone lines, that refer to all kinds of mechanical voting equipment, and it's just some things that don't really make a lot of sense anymore. And trying to get those things updated and fixed is an uphill battle. What I do think is that every election we are seeing a new generation of folks getting elected who are paying more attention to these local issues. I think we've seen a lot, at least in the Congress, and in my other hat, I'm a lobbyist on Capitol Hill. And to Leslie's point, anything moving right now it's very rare. I mean, this is the textbook definition of a do-nothing Congress. So I would not hold out any hope for any major federal legislation in the near future, at least not until next January when we have a new Congress coming in. What I will say is that I think if you've noticed, there's been pretty significant turnover in both the House of Delegates in Virginia, but also in the federal Congress. Since 2006, almost half the Congress has changed. So you're bringing in a new generation. I think a lot of those folks are going to be a little more amenable to the technology changes, a little more amenable to the precinct level and the local changes, and they're going to realize that the way that they got elected, that process is important and it needs to be paid attention to. And I'm cautiously optimistic that that's going to kind of break the dam on some of this legislation to get it moving across the country.
Keep going. 25 after.
Just wondered if the panelists would comment on Lois Page, where we are in voting machines. What's happening? What's the new stuff? And what?
I'll do a little bit of that. My company keeps track of what kind of voting systems are used in every single county in the country and have since 1980. So we kind of keep up on that. What we're seeing now is kind of a sea change going on. That's part of the problem of that, however, is that nobody has any money to buy it. And so we're caught in this circumstance where the old electronic machines that we all bought with HAVA money in 2003, 2004 are now, unfortunately, wearing out. And we're going to have to get something. The issue becomes is what is that something? And a lot of the vendors are caught, the old-time vendors are caught with a lot of R&D with not a lot to show yet. But there are some new vendors coming onto the stream that have some new innovative things. The iPad that I have here is starting to be used more and more. So we're starting to see some newer kinds of technology coming into play. Part of the problem with the voting equipment, though, is that it has to be federally certified. And if you think Congress is bad to get something through, try to get certification through on the EAC. So there's a lot of things happening, but at a snail's pace.
I'm intimately familiar with the voting equipment stuff since we just finished a multi-million-dollar procurement. We're about to announce probably in the next 2 weeks that we've selected our vendor. We were able to get $6 million from our Board of Supervisors to do that, which is not going to be the full amount that we're going to need, but it's going to get us most of the way there. I think that at least in Virginia, 2000, I believe it was 2007, 2008, the General Assembly barred localities for purchasing touchscreen DRE style machines. So for a lot of the jurisdictions, many of them took advantage of that and bought those machines that year before the law kicked in. Those machines are going to be probably nearing the end of their useful life in the next 3 or 4 years. So a lot of jurisdictions like Fairfax were looking at new machines. We had bought ours on the front end in 2002. Ours pretty much fell out of favor, and the last major election that we used them in was the presidential in 2012. We started making the switch to optical scan technology, which is kind of the blast from the past that everybody seems to be using now, in 2008. And we bought enough optical scanners to handle all of our precincts, but we bought them used. So those are also nearing the end of their useful life. So that's really why we had to go through this process now. I think what you're seeing is the fundamental belief that the voter is going to feel more comfortable with a piece of paper that he or she can mark, put in a machine, and know is going to be counted and is going to exist. And it's going to be a record of what their intent was at the time that they voted. The problem with the touchscreens is they don't have that faith in the process, because you walk up, you punch a button on a machine, you hope that it counted, and the only thing that machine is going to kick out at the end of the day is a ticker tape with a listing of the numbers. There's no way to go back through and really audit whether or not that machine got everything correctly, or that it wasn't hacked, or there wasn't any issues. Although I say the hack thing because there's always going to be a minority conspiracy theorist guy out there that thinks somebody's going to go up there and touch a machine, and it's going to make it vote all for their candidate and none for the other guy. And that doesn't happen, but it's an issue. And so what I think you're seeing, at least in November general election last fall, where we had our recount in the Attorney General's race, we actually physically recounted in Virginia almost 700,000 ballots, which was about half of those were cast on paper ballots. And that's great, in my opinion, because we had a record. We had a physical record of all of those votes that we could go back and look through, and we could count all the ones that went through the machines properly. And if they did not, if there was an issue, as Kim mentioned earlier, where there was an overvote or an undervote, or the machine didn't properly register what the ballot was supposed to read, we could have human beings physically looking at the ballot and making the determination, all right, who is this person voting for? Now, you'd think that process would become highly partisan and people would be shouting at each other, no, they voted for Republican, no, they voted for the Democrat. The reality is we counted about 315,000 recounts in Fairfax County. We did it in a day, and we had fewer than 20 challenge ballots. We had teams of two, a Republican and a Democrat, with two observers from both parties working, and the vast majority of the decisions on those ballots that weren't counted by the machines were done in a pretty amicable fashion. We had a whole a booklet of examples of what people might do wrong and what this means that State Board had provided, that actually our General Registrar had written when she was Secretary of the State Board back in 2002. And our folks went through and they figured it out. And that really, I think, is really comforting to voters, and I think it should be comforting to the general public, because you have that ability to go back and double check and make sure that things were done properly. And that's why I think you're going to see that movement towards optical scan technology that is going to become the new wave of the future in terms of machines, and you're going to see a back away from the touch screens. Now, there are best of both worlds out there. There are ballot marking devices right now that are we are going to be purchasing for our ADA accessibility machines that will allow folks to use a touch screen to vote, and it physically prints out a ballot that they then run through the scanner, and that record is still there. So it still gives you the ability to do everything that you need to do in terms of accessibility, but at the same time it does print a ballot that can be kept and can be recounted in the event that we have a close election. So I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the technology moving. And as the scanners get faster and they get better, the data collection gets better. We've seen some software products that are tied into the voting machines that will let you pull up every individual ballot and see the scanned image and make corrections on there, and then run that through without having to have any kind of physical handling of the ballots after the fact, but it lets you fix errors and provide the correct intent of the voter right there on the machine. That's really where these things are moving. And I think, as Kim pointed out, the real issue is going to be cost. But the benefit is, once you start having large jurisdictions like Fairfax County, like Prince William, like Loudoun, making purchases, that drives down the cost for a lot of the other smaller jurisdictions, because these companies, they want the big contract. And if they get the big contract, it's very easy for them to grab on a couple other smaller jurisdictions and give them the same pricing because they're already having to manufacture and provide the equipment to the smaller localities. So I expect that once we make our announcement in the next 2 or 3 weeks here, that you're going to see a number of smaller jurisdictions in Virginia that are going to go and say, all right, we want what Fairfax got, and they're going to go and they're going to get it. And if they have the money, that's going to make it possible for them to upgrade their machines. But again, a lot of this business, it's really about making sure you have resources. And that the counties are really putting their money where their mouths are when it comes to the election process. And I think, fortunately, most localities are doing the right thing. I think not everybody, but for the most part, most localities are doing the right thing.
Just as an Arlington County poll worker, just real quick, we have the electronic voting equipment, and in elections where they expect a bigger turnout, we also have optical scan. And I noticed in one of the commission reports, I don't remember whether it was Kimball's or Brian's, but they were saying that we actually had lines in Arlington County because people didn't want to use the paper ballot. They wanted to use the electronic voting equipment. And the issue really, we would joke like paper or plastic as they were coming through so that they could make the choice on what they wanted to vote. And they always, the line was a result of them waiting to use the electronic voting equipment because they didn't trust the paper. They didn't think that the paper ballot was going to be counted the same way. Is it the same ballot? It was so moving to a paper ballot is definitely going to have to be an education process, because in Arlington you're going to have to pry those voting machines out of our cold dead hands. We're not going to let them go. Yes, sir.
Was it that, or was it also the fact that 5 voting positions doing white paper ballots could feed one scanner continuously? There were more people voting on paper. It took less time.
Well, we didn't
Per ballot.
Yeah, we didn't actually have more people voting on paper. The stations where people could vote on paper were empty.
We did in Fairfax.
Yeah, nobody wanted to use the paper.
Very quickly, we had that exact issue because we started last fall pushing folks to use the paper and not actually offering them. In November 2012 election, we offered, do you want to use touchscreen, you want to use paper? And it caused exactly that problem because people wanted to use the touchscreens. Some anecdotes of things we heard from folks, well, I don't trust that paper machine, it looks like a shredder. Is this just a trash can? I mean, and I'll be honest, when we went through our procurement process, one of the vendors, their ballot boxes looked an awful lot like trash cans. I said, you guys got to fix this, because you're going to have a lot of people a little nervous about where they're putting their ballots into. But that's absolutely true. Now, in 2013, we did not offer that choice. We used the touchscreen strictly as our ADA compliant device, and we slapped a big handicap sticker on them so people would think that they were just for the folks who disability community absolutely needed them. And that was great because it kept folks from asking, or why are we doing this? But I'll tell you, I got a number of angry emails from folks saying, I pay X amount of money for Fairfax County taxes, I shouldn't be voting on a piece of paper. And that's just how it is, and we have to do an education process. But I think that's really going to be part of any rollout of these new machines. The election administration officials have got to do a good job of educating voters why we're doing it and why it makes sense. And once you explain it to folks, they get it. Exactly. Well, and you guys are great. I want to say this before we wrap up. I want to thank the league, particularly Olga and a number of my friends here from the Fairfax community. I'll tell you, whenever I go to State Board, you'll go to State Board of Elections meeting, there will be nobody there except for the league. You will go to a Board of Supervisors meeting, and they'll talk about budget, and you'll have folks up there from the schools, and you'll have folks up there from the disability community, you'll have folks up there from all these different interest groups. The only group talking about elections is you guys. Thank you. You are a great partner. We could not do it without your help. Please keep up the good work. You're making my job much easier. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your Saturday to come out here and listen to us prattle on for an hour and a half. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Brian, and members of the panel, and Leslie. Before you get an even more official thanks, I just wanted to point out that Brian, you really led into this, because several of the takeaways from this discussion have been, we've corresponded with the local leagues, monitor your electoral board, talk to your Board of Supervisors or Board of Council members at budget time about getting the resources to purchase the new equipment to pay the election officers. If you're in a jurisdiction that really needs election officers, go out, advertise, get the election officers, sign up yourself to do that. Yes, well, some of the jurisdictions do have the split shifts, and some use them. Also, too, put the information on your website and check not only your website, but your county or your city or your town website to check to make sure that they do have the voting information there. And when you are putting out your information, we talked at the very beginning about the importance of online voter registration. Make sure that all of your information materials advertise the online voter registration. I just saw one recently, a league little flyer, but that did not mention the ability to register online. So I think a lot of you have a lot of takeaways from this discussion today to work in your local leagues. And I really want to thank the members of the panel. I mean, you have the perfect audience here, the League of Women Voters. I mean, talking about elections, hey, this is great. Okay, so thank you so very much. Okay.